right now, somewhere in your mind, there's a voice that never stops talking. It whispers that you're not enough, that you're behind in life, that everyone else has it figured out while you're still struggling. You're not alone in this. If this feels like a safe space for you right now, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Maybe drop it in the comments if it feels right. Are you at home, on a walk, maybe lying in bed, trying to quiet that restless mind? Here's what I want you to know before we begin this journey together. You don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to become someone different. What we're about to explore isn't about forcing your mind into submission or pushing away uncomfortable thoughts. If you can, find a comfortable position. Maybe pull a soft blanket around you, or simply let your shoulders drop just a little. This isn't work you need to do. It's more like coming home to something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten. A Buddhist monk once spent 4 years in complete isolation, wrestling with the exact thoughts that might be visiting you right now. What he discovered in his darkest moment changed everything, not just for him, but for thousands of people who've learned this gentle way of meeting their own minds with kindness instead of war. Your overthinking mind isn't your enemy. Let me show you why. You know that feeling when your phone buzzes in your pocket, and even before you check it, your heart rate quickens just a little. That's not an accident. That's your nervous system responding to what has become the soundtrack of modern life, the constant hum of anxiety that we've all learned to call normal. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Your mind has become like a browser with 47 tabs open, each one demanding attention, each one convinced it's the most important thing in the world. And somewhere in that chaos, a voice has learned to speak louder than all the rest. It's the voice that wakes up with you in the morning, already cataloging everything you should be worried about today. Did you send that email? Why did you say that thing yesterday? Everyone else seems to have their life together. You're falling behind. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not successful enough. And the strangest part, we've learned to believe this voice is trying to help us. We think if we just criticize ourselves hard enough, push ourselves far enough, worry about enough possibilities, we'll finally reach that place where the voice says, "Okay, you can rest now. You've done enough. You are enough." But that day never comes, does it? Instead, we live in what feels like a constant state of emergency. Our bodies carry tension we don't even notice anymore. Our minds race from one worry to the next like a pinball bouncing between bumpers. And we scroll through our phones seeking something we're not even sure what, but something to make this feeling stop. Here's what makes this even more puzzling. We're living in the most materially comfortable time in human history. We have access to more information, more entertainment, more convenience than any generation before us. We can order food with a few taps, connect with people across the globe instantly, access libraries of knowledge from our couches. Yet somehow, rates of anxiety and depression continue climbing. Suicide rates have reached levels not seen in decades. Young people report feeling more lonely and purposeless than ever before. The United States has dropped from 11th place to 24th in global happiness rankings in just over a decade. The United Kingdom has fallen to 23rd place, its lowest position in years. We've created a world of incredible external comfort, but internal peace seems more elusive than ever. Something doesn't add up. I want to share something with you that might sound counterintuitive at first. The very things we've been told will make us happy, the achievements, the possessions, the perfect life we're building, might actually be part of what's keeping us trapped in this cycle of never feeling quite enough. Think about the last time you got something you really wanted. Maybe it was a promotion, a new relationship, a purchase you'd been saving for. For a moment, there was relief, wasn't there? A brief pause in that constant sense of wanting, of needing something to be different. But how long did that feeling last? If you're honest, and this isn't a criticism, it's just how the human mind works, pretty soon, another want appeared. Another goal, another thing that would make you feel complete. The sense of not enough returned, often stronger than before. This is what happens when we put our happiness on the other side of getting something. We become prisoners of our own desires. We live at the mercy of circumstances, constantly at the receiving end of life, wondering what it's going to do to us next. And here's the cruel irony. We've built an entire culture around feeding this insatiable hunger. Every advertisement tells us we're missing something. Every social media post shows us someone who seems to have what we lack. Every headline warns us of new dangers, new inadequacies, new reasons to worry. The message is consistent and relentless. Something is always missing. You're not good enough as you are. If you get this, then you'll be okay. When this happens to you, then, and only then, can you be happy. But the search itself has become the problem. Here's what I mean by that. When we're constantly searching for the next thing that will make us feel better, we're actually reinforcing the belief that right now, in this moment, we're somehow lacking. We're telling ourselves, I'll be happy when I get that job, find that relationship, solve that problem, fix that thing about myself. But searching is a habit that creates more searching. The mind that's always looking for the next source of happiness becomes less and less able to find satisfaction in what's already here. We end up like someone standing in a room full of food, convinced they're starving because they can't stop looking for the next meal. The more we want, the more we feel we don't have. We might end up with quite a lot materially, but feeling empty inside. And then we're back to that question that haunts so many of us. What's it all for? What's my purpose? I've reached the goals I wanted to reach, but I still feel like something is missing. And then there's the phone. This little device that's supposed to connect us to everything we want has somehow become a constant reminder of everything we don't have. We reach for it dozens of times a day, often without even realizing we're doing it. Our nervous systems have learned to expect constant stimulation, constant input, constant distraction from whatever we're feeling in this moment. We've become buried in our devices, invaded by a constant flow of information with persuasive undercurrents. This is affecting our stress levels and our confidence levels. We're constantly made to feel that something's missing, that we're not good enough, that we need to keep consuming, keep achieving, keep proving ourselves. But what happens when the battery dies? What happens when we're forced to sit with ourselves, with our own thoughts, with the silence? Many of us have lost the ability to be comfortable in our own company. We've become strangers to our own minds. I want you to try something with me right now. Don't worry. It's not meditation. Not yet. Just notice what it feels like to be in your body in this moment. Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw clenched? Are you breathing shallow, quick breaths up in your chest? Most of us are carrying so much unconscious tension that we don't even realize we're in a constant state of low-level fight or flight. Our bodies are preparing for emergencies that never come or never stop coming. We're exhausted, but we can't figure out why. And underneath all of this, the constant stimulation, the endless searching, the physical tension, there's something else. A deeper sense that somehow we've lost touch with something essential, something that used to feel solid and reliable. Maybe we call it peace, or contentment, or just the simple ability to be okay with things as they are. Many people describe it as feeling like they're living on the surface of their own lives, going through the motions, checking boxes, staying busy enough to avoid that nagging sense that something important is missing. But what's missing isn't another achievement or possession or experience. What's missing is the ability to come home to ourselves. Now, here's something that might come as a tremendous relief. You're not broken. This isn't evidence that you're doing life wrong or that you're somehow defective. What you're experiencing is simply what happens when we try to find inner peace through outer circumstances. It's like trying to quench your thirst by looking at pictures of water. You're not broken. You're human. And being human in this particular time, in this particular culture, comes with some unique challenges that previous generations never had to face. The constant connectivity, the information overload, the 24/7 news cycle, designed to keep us in a state of perpetual alertness. What you're experiencing right now, this sense of never being quite enough, this constant mental commentary, this feeling of being at the mercy of your own thoughts. Millions of people are going through this exact same thing. You're not alone in this struggle. You're not uniquely broken or fundamentally flawed. You're simply trying to solve an inside problem with outside solutions. The Buddhist teacher who spent over 30 years helping people find freedom from this exact kind of suffering puts it this way: we've all become prisoners of our own minds, but we've forgotten we hold the keys. Think about that for a moment. Prisoners of our own minds, trapped not by external circumstances, but by the way we've learned to relate to our own thoughts and feelings, controlled not by the world around us, but by the constant commentary running in our heads. We become controlled by distraction, controlled by negative thinking, always wondering what life is going to do to us next, how we'll handle it. There's not much strength in that position. But here's the thing about being a prisoner of your own mind. If you built the prison, you can also find the way out. What we're really looking for, in all our searching and striving and scrolling, is freedom. Freedom from that nagging sense of inadequacy. Freedom from the constant worry about what might go wrong. Freedom from the exhausting work of trying to control everything and everyone around us to make ourselves feel safe. We want the freedom to be genuinely okay, regardless of what's happening in our external circumstances. The freedom to feel peace that doesn't depend on getting what we want or avoiding what we don't want. The freedom to be present in our own lives instead of always living in our heads. When you think about how it feels when you get what you want, there's a kind of relief, isn't there? The wanting goes away. It's like hunger. You feel hungry. You eat something. The hunger disappears. There's this moment of freedom from the needy feeling, from the "when will I get it" sensation. So what we're actually looking for is the absence of wanting. That's the happiness we achieve when we get what we want, a kind of freedom from desire. But then, very soon, we want something else. We're caught in a cycle where we get temporary relief, then immediately start wanting again. What if I told you that freedom is actually your natural state? That underneath all the mental noise and emotional reactivity and physical tension, there's something in you that has never been touched by any of it? Something that has been calm and aware and okay this whole time, just waiting for you to remember it's there. This isn't positive thinking or wishful optimism. This is something that has been understood and taught for over 2,500 years. Something that has helped millions of people find genuine peace in the middle of circumstances far more challenging than anything most of us will ever face. There's an ancient secret that changes everything. A secret that has nothing to do with changing your circumstances or fixing your problems or becoming a different person. A secret that has been hidden in plain sight all along, waiting for the moment when you're ready to stop searching outside yourself and start exploring the vast, peaceful space that has always been within you. The secret is this: what you've been looking for was already there inside. Let me tell you about a young man who thought he had life figured out. His name was Geelong Thubton, though back then he went by a different name entirely. He was 21, living between London and New York, chasing his dream of becoming an actor. His mother was an actress, and he wanted to follow in her footsteps. From the outside, his life looked like something many people would envy. He was studying at Oxford University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. He was performing in plays, building what seemed like a glamorous career. He had this almost magnetic persona, this ability to light up a room. But behind the curtain, something else was happening entirely. You see, this young man had learned to live a double life from a very early age. By 13, he was running with a much older crowd. By 14, he was working as a jazz pianist in wine bars across London, pretending to be 21. He was in a rock band with people who were much older than him, people who introduced him to a world he wasn't ready for. There were things that happened during those teenage years, things that left invisible scars. When he was 14, someone in that band, someone he trusted, violated that trust in the most devastating way possible. Sexual abuse that at the time he thought he understood, but looking back, he was just a child being taken advantage of by an adult. These experiences made him frightened of himself and frightened of other people. They planted seeds of shame and self-loathing that would grow in the dark corners of his mind for years to come. But like so many of us do when we're hurt, he learned to run. Not physically at first, but mentally. He discovered that if he stayed busy enough, distracted enough, if he threw himself into enough parties and enough projects, he could avoid feeling the pain that was growing inside him. He became incredibly skilled at escapism, at creating personas that would keep the world and himself from seeing what was really happening underneath. Then, when he was 17, another explosion shattered what was left of his sense of stability. His parents split up suddenly and dramatically. His father literally ran off with one of his mother's friends. It was a huge betrayal that left the entire family broken and reeling. This young man, who was already carrying so much unprocessed pain, now had to watch his whole family structure collapse overnight. The message his teenage mind absorbed was clear. People you love will abandon you. People you trust will betray you. By the time he reached his 20s, his life had become a carefully constructed escape plan. During the day, he was the studious, ambitious, young actor. At night, he was burning the candle at both ends, in a party lifestyle that was growing more and more dangerous. At Oxford, the pressure became too much. The depression that he'd been running from finally caught up with him. He stopped functioning entirely, stopped going to classes, stopped taking care of himself, stopped engaging with his studies. They expelled him. As his mother later joked, it's actually quite hard to get thrown out of Oxford. You have to do something pretty spectacular. But in his case, they simply couldn't handle someone who was completely non-functional. This should have been a wake-up call, but instead, it just sent him deeper into his spiral. He moved to New York, threw himself even more desperately into the acting world, and ramped up the partying to dangerous levels. He was living in Brooklyn at the time, and every morning he would wake up feeling like he was drowning. There was this voice in his head, maybe you recognize it from your own experience, that never stopped talking. You are disgusting. You are no good. You are a failure. He called it his devil voice, though he knew it was really part of himself. This incredibly persistent monologue of self-disgust that followed him everywhere he went. The more successful he appeared on the outside, the louder this voice became on the inside. It was as if his mind had taken every cruel thing that had ever been done to him and turned it into a weapon against himself. He had become his own worst enemy, carrying his abusers' voices long after they were gone. And so he ran faster. More parties, more distractions, more ways to avoid being alone with his own thoughts. He wasn't looking after himself at all. He was treating his body and mind like obstacles to overcome rather than parts of himself that deserved care. Then came the morning that changed everything. He woke up in his apartment in Brooklyn, and immediately something felt wrong. His heart was racing, but not in the normal way after a night out. This was different. This felt like his chest was going to explode. His body was bathed in sweat from just the effort of sitting up in bed. He was convinced he was having a heart attack. Here he was, 21 years old, thinking he might die alone in his apartment because of the way he'd been living. He managed to get himself to a clinic. He didn't have medical insurance, but he found a cheap place that would do an ECG. The doctors looked at the results and asked him a question that stopped him cold. "What have you been doing to yourself?" He did have a heart condition. His body was basically staging an intervention. All those months and years of running from his pain, of pushing through and pushing down, and never stopping to rest, it had caught up with him in the most dramatic way possible. For the next few months, he was essentially an invalid. Any movement would make his body break out in sweat. His heart would start racing at the slightest exertion. He had to lie flat on planes when he flew. His childhood friend Tara basically had to carry him places. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, he couldn't run anymore. He couldn't party his way out of his feelings. He couldn't stay busy enough to avoid his own thoughts. He was forced to sit with the very things he'd been trying to escape his entire adult life. The silence was deafening. Without the constant noise and stimulation, all those buried feelings started rising to the surface. The shame, the rage, the profound sense of being fundamentally broken, it all came flooding back with nowhere to hide. That's when Tara made a suggestion that seemed completely crazy at the time. She told him about a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Scotland called Samye Ling. For the first time ever, they were opening their doors to people who wanted to try being monks for a year. Just 1 year. "This could really help you," she said. "It's just a year out of your life." He almost kept his apartment in New York, planning to return after this strange detour. He thought of it as a kind of rehab, a place to get himself straightened out before going back to the life he'd been living. When he arrived at the monastery, he was basically a broken person. Physically ill, emotionally shattered, spiritually empty. The monks were kind enough to let him rest, to do light work around the grounds while his body slowly healed. And slowly, almost despite himself, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Relief. The things he was giving up as part of becoming a monk, the drinking, the constant stimulation, the chaotic relationships, these weren't sacrifices. They were the very things that had been making him sick. For the first time in his adult life, he was in an environment where he didn't have to perform, didn't have to prove anything, didn't have to run from himself. There was also something profound about the celibacy vows that he hadn't expected. When sexual chemistry is off the agenda entirely, he discovered, you start having friendships that are truly heart-based. He was meeting people who were on the same path as him, looking for the same kind of freedom from suffering. But here's the thing about healing. It's rarely a straight line upward. That 1 year turned into several years. He took lifelong vows to be a monk. When he put on the robes for the first time, he felt every cell in his body click into place. This was what he'd been looking for all along, a way of working with his mind rather than being victimized by it. After 12 years as a monk, he felt ready for the ultimate test. A 4-year retreat, complete isolation from the world, no one going in or out, just him, a small group of other monks doing their own practice in separate rooms, and his mind. He thought he was ready. After 12 years of monastic life, surely he had developed enough tools, enough understanding, enough inner strength to handle whatever came up. He had been teaching meditation to others, giving talks about Buddhism. Maybe he thought he was quite sorted out by then. He had no idea what was waiting for him in that silence. The first few weeks were difficult, but manageable. Then the first few months brought challenges he had expected. But as the months turned into the first year, and then the second year, something began happening that caught him completely off guard. Memories started surfacing. Not just memories, but the emotions attached to them. All the pain he thought he had dealt with, all the trauma he thought he had processed, all the hurt he thought he had left behind, it all came flooding back with a vengeance. The depression was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Waves of anxiety that would build into full-blown panic attacks. That voice, his devil voice, became so loud, it was like having someone screaming in his ear 24 hours a day. You are disgusting. You will never be good enough. You're failing at this too. You can't even be a proper monk. For 2 years, he tortured himself trying to figure out why he was suffering so much. He would lie awake at night, his mind racing with theories and explanations. Was it because of what happened when he was 14? Was it his parents' divorce when he was 17? Was it the abuse, the trauma, the years of self-destructive behavior? He became obsessed with the story of his pain. He tried to do therapy on himself, thinking that if he could just understand the why, he could fix the what. But the more he went down that road, the worse everything got. The more he tried to analyze and solve and push away his suffering, the more trapped he became. He felt completely alienated from Buddhism, from the monastery, from everything he thought he believed in. Here he was, supposed to be this dedicated practitioner, and he was falling apart more completely than he ever had before. He started to question everything. The suffering built and built until one morning, he woke up and simply couldn't take it anymore. He had the most intense panic attack of his life. His vision went red. His body was shaking uncontrollably. Every cell in his being was screaming at him to get out, to run, to escape this unbearable situation. It felt like there was a knife constantly twisting in his heart. And so he did something that was completely unthinkable in a 4-year retreat. He ran to the boundary wall of the retreat center, and he climbed over it. Picture this: a Buddhist monk in robes, running through the rain on a remote Scottish island, having completely abandoned everything he had committed to. He ran and ran until his legs gave out, and then he stood there in the middle of nowhere, soaking wet, and asked himself a question that changed everything. What are you doing? What has happened to you? In that moment, standing in the rain, after having just thrown away years of spiritual practice, something crystallized for him. He realized that he had been approaching his suffering in completely the wrong way. He had been trying to push it away, to analyze it, to escape from it. He had been treating his pain like an enemy to be defeated, rather than a part of himself that needed compassion. He turned around and walked back to the retreat center. He knocked on the door and begged to be let back in. The leaders were reluctant. People don't just leave a 4-year retreat and then come back. But something in his voice, something in his desperation and clarity, convinced them to give him another chance. They made him stay in a small caravan on the edge of the retreat boundary for a week. 7 days to think about what he was doing, to decide if he really wanted to continue. And during those 7 days, he made a decision that would transform not just his own life, but the lives of thousands of people he would eventually teach. He was going back in, but this time he was going to try something completely different. Instead of running from his pain, he was going to move toward it. Instead of trying to fix himself, he was going to learn to be with himself, exactly as he was. He realized that hitting rock bottom wasn't his failure, it was his foundation. All that suffering, all that apparent breakdown, wasn't evidence that he was doing something wrong. It was his mind finally feeling safe enough to show him what it had been carrying all along. The monastery walls hadn't been keeping him prisoner. His own mind had been the prison, and running away from the retreat was just another form of running away from himself. But you can run to the end of the earth, and the thing that's been tormenting you will always find you there, because it's part of you. When he went back into that retreat center, he carried with him a revolutionary understanding. The pain wasn't something to be solved. It was something to be met with the same tenderness you might show a frightened animal. He had spent so much effort trying to push his suffering away because it was so disgusting and shameful to him. But that was what was making it worse. What if, instead of fighting against it, he learned to turn toward it with curiosity and kindness? What if the very thing he had been trying to escape was actually the doorway to his freedom? What he discovered next changed everything. When the monk returned to his retreat after jumping over that wall, he carried with him a question that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his own mind. The question wasn't complicated, but its implications were revolutionary. If I can observe my suffering, who is doing the observing? This might sound like philosophical wordplay, but for someone who had been at war with his own thoughts for decades, it was the first crack of light through a door he didn't even know existed. Here's what happened when he started paying attention to this simple but profound distinction. Back in his retreat room, sitting with that familiar knife of pain twisting in his chest, he began to notice something he had never seen before. There was the pain, sharp, overwhelming, demanding all his attention. But there was also something else, something that was aware of the pain. Think about this for a moment. When you're angry, there's the anger itself, the heat, the tension, the rush of thoughts and emotions. But there's also the part of you that knows you're angry, the part that can say, "I'm really upset right now." That knowing part, can it be angry? The monk realized that the part of his mind that was observing his anger couldn't itself be angry because it was watching the anger from a different place entirely. It was like discovering that he had been living in a house his whole life without realizing there was a second floor. This discovery completely changed how he understood the relationship between himself and his thoughts. For years, he had believed that he was his thoughts. When the voice in his head said, "You're disgusting," he assumed that was him talking. When anxiety flooded his system, he identified completely with that anxious state. But now he was beginning to see that there was something larger than those mental states, something that could observe them without being consumed by them. His teacher had once shared a metaphor that suddenly made perfect sense. The mind, he said, is like the sky, and thoughts and emotions are like clouds. Let's explore this image together for a moment. Picture a vast blue sky on a perfect day. Now imagine clouds beginning to form. Some are light and wispy, drifting by peacefully. Others are dark and heavy, threatening storms. The clouds can be angry clouds, full of thunder and lightning. They can be sad clouds, weeping rain. They can be anxious clouds, moving frantically across the horizon. But no matter how intense the weather, what happens to the sky itself? the sky remains unchanged. It's not damaged by the lightning. It's not made wet by the rain. It's not moved by the wind. The sky simply contains all weather patterns without being affected by any of them. The monk began to understand that his awareness was like that sky. The depression, anxiety, self-hatred, and panic attacks were weather patterns moving through the vast space of his consciousness. They were real. They were sometimes intense, but they were not him. This wasn't just a nice philosophical idea. It was a lived experience that changed everything about how he related to his inner world. Instead of being tossed around by every emotional storm, he could rest in the spaciousness that contained all storms. But here's where it gets really interesting. For most of his adult life, this monk had been trying to do meditation completely wrong. And chances are, if you've ever tried to meditate, you've made the same mistake he did. He had heard the phrase, "clear your mind," and assumed that was what meditation was about. Sit down, push away all thoughts, achieve some kind of blank, peaceful state, like turning off a television that's been blaring too loudly. So he would sit down with grim determination and try to force his mind into silence. He would push away every thought that arose. He would clench his jaw and furrow his brow and use all his willpower to create some kind of mental vacuum. And what happened? The thoughts got louder, much louder. It was like trying to get a small child to sit still in their high chair while you're feeding them. The more you insist they stop moving, the more they're going to squirm and fuss and eventually have a complete meltdown. That negative voice, his devil voice, became absolutely deafening when he tried to suppress it. "You can't even meditate properly," it would scream. "You're failing at this too. Everyone else can clear their mind except you. You're hopeless." He began to hate meditation. Here was this practice that was supposed to bring peace, and it was making him more agitated than ever. He would sit down for what was supposed to be a calming session and end up more stressed than when he started. It wasn't until much later that he discovered the truth. Meditation has nothing to do with clearing your mind. This might come as a relief if you've ever tried to meditate and felt like you were bad at it because your mind wouldn't stop chattering. The constant stream of thoughts isn't a problem to be solved. It's not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's just what minds do. Minds think. That's their job. Trying to stop your mind from thinking is like trying to stop your heart from beating. It's not only impossible, it's completely missing the point. So what is meditation actually about? It's about changing your relationship with your thoughts. It's about learning to be the sky instead of identifying with every cloud that passes through. Here's how this works in practice. You sit down and focus on something, usually your breath, not because breathing is magical, but because it gives your attention somewhere to rest. Within seconds, your mind will wander. You'll start thinking about your grocery list, that conversation you had yesterday, what you need to do tomorrow. This is where most people think they've failed. They notice their mind has wandered and immediately judge themselves. I'm terrible at this. I can't focus for even 10 seconds. I might as well give up. But here's the revolutionary insight. The moment you notice your mind has wandered is not the moment you failed. It's the moment you woke up. It's the moment you became the observer again, instead of being lost in the observed. Think about what just happened. You were lost in thought, completely identified with whatever story your mind was telling. Then suddenly, awareness returned. You found yourself thinking about something other than your breath. That finding, that noticing, that sudden return of awareness, that's meditation. That's exactly what you're training when you meditate. You're strengthening your ability to wake up inside your own mind. The monk began to understand this through his own experience. He would sit with his breath, get lost in thoughts about his past trauma, then suddenly realize he was supposed to be meditating. Instead of berating himself, he started to get curious about that moment of awakening. Who or what was it that noticed he had been lost in thought? What was the quality of awareness that could step back and observe the mental activity? It felt different from the thoughts themselves, more spacious, more peaceful, more stable. Over time, he began to recognize this aware presence as his true nature. Not the chattering mind with all its stories and complaints and worries. Not the emotions that came and went like weather systems, but the consciousness that was always present, always observing, always unchanged by whatever it was witnessing. This might sound abstract, but let me invite you to experience it directly. Right now, as you're listening to these words, notice that you're aware of hearing them. There's the sound of the voice, and there's your awareness of that sound. Now notice that you're also aware of other things simultaneously. Maybe the feeling of your body against whatever you're sitting or lying on. Maybe sounds in your environment. Maybe the temperature of the air on your skin. That awareness that can hold all these different experiences at once. That's what we're talking about. It's not another thought. It's the space in which all thoughts arise and dissolve. The monk started to experiment with resting his attention in this aware presence instead of trying to control his thoughts. When painful memories arose, instead of pushing them away, he would step back into the observer position. He would notice there's a memory arising. There's sadness present. There's that familiar voice saying harsh things. But he would also notice, and here I am, aware of all of this. The awareness itself is not sad. The awareness itself is not damaged by these memories. This practice began to create a sense of space around his most difficult experiences. The pain was still there, but it was held in something larger and more stable. It was like the difference between being caught in a riptide and watching waves from a lighthouse. He discovered that he could be present with his suffering without being consumed by it. He could acknowledge his thoughts without believing them. He could feel his emotions without losing himself in them. But perhaps the most profound shift was in how he related to that critical, inner voice. For years, when his devil voice would start its familiar litany, "You're disgusting, you're worthless, you're a failure," he would either believe it completely or fight against it desperately. Now he began to hear it differently. It was just another cloud passing through the sky of his awareness. A very noisy, persistent cloud, but a cloud nonetheless. He didn't have to identify with it or be ruled by it. He started responding to that voice the way you might respond to a car alarm going off outside your window. Annoying, yes. Loud, definitely, but also clearly not you, not yours, and not something you need to take personally. This wasn't about positive thinking or trying to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. It was about discovering a completely different relationship with the whole thinking process. Instead of being at the mercy of whatever thoughts arose, he was learning to be the space in which all thoughts could arise and pass away safely. Over the remaining years of his retreat, this understanding deepened and stabilized. He began to experience what Buddhist teachings call the unshakable, a quality of awareness that remains calm and clear regardless of what's happening in the mind or body. The depression didn't disappear overnight. The anxiety didn't magically vanish. The traumatic memories didn't erase themselves. But his relationship to all of these experiences transformed completely. He was no longer at war with his own mind. He had found the eye of the hurricane, the place of stillness and peace that exists at the center of even the most chaotic mental weather. Let me offer you a simple way to begin exploring this for yourself. The next time you notice you're caught up in a difficult emotion or a stream of negative thinking, try this gentle experiment. Instead of trying to stop the thoughts or change the emotion, simply ask yourself, who is aware of this thinking? Who is noticing this emotion? Don't try to figure out the answer intellectually. Just rest your attention in the awareness that's already present, the consciousness that's reading these words right now, that's aware of your surroundings, that's been with you every moment of your life. You might be surprised to discover that this awareness has a different quality than your thoughts and emotions. It tends to be more spacious, more peaceful, more stable. It's not improved by pleasant experiences or damaged by difficult ones. It simply is. This discovery that you are not your thoughts, but rather the awareness in which thoughts arise, is the first step toward genuine inner freedom. But as the monk learned in his retreat, knowing this intellectually is very different from living it consistently. But knowing this isn't enough. Now that you understand you are not your thoughts, let me share with you the most revolutionary discovery the monk made during those final years of his retreat. It wasn't some esoteric spiritual technique or ancient secret ritual. It was something so simple that most people dismiss it as too basic to be transformative. The secret practice that changed his life forever can be broken down into exactly 3 steps. 3 things that anyone can do, anywhere, at any time. No special equipment, no years of training, no perfect conditions required. But here's what makes this practice so powerful. It's not about what you might think meditation is about. Most people approach meditation like they're trying to achieve some kind of perfect mental state. They sit down expecting to feel blissful, peaceful, transcendent. They think successful meditation means having no thoughts, feeling completely calm, reaching some kind of spiritual high. This is like going to the gym expecting to leave, feeling completely rested. You don't go to the gym to feel relaxed. You go to exercise your muscles. The workout might be challenging, even uncomfortable, but that's exactly how you know it's working. Meditation is the same. You're not trying to achieve a particular state. You're exercising a particular capacity, the capacity to choose where you place your attention. So let me walk you through the 3 sacred steps that will transform your relationship with your own mind. Not because they'll make your thoughts disappear, but because they'll teach you how to be free, regardless of what thoughts arise. Step 1. Focus on your breathing. This isn't breath work where you're trying to breathe in any particular way. You're not trying to breathe slowly or deeply or in any special pattern. You're simply letting your breath be natural and using it as an anchor for your attention. Find a comfortable position. Sitting in a chair is perfectly fine. You don't need to sit cross-legged on the floor unless that feels comfortable for you. Close your eyes or soften your gaze downward. Start by just becoming aware of your body. Feel your hands resting wherever they are. Notice your shoulders and allow any tension to drop away naturally. Bring your attention to the front of your body and start to notice the natural rhythm of your breathing. You can focus on the rising and falling of your chest or belly, or you might prefer to feel the sensation of air moving in and out through your nostrils. There's no right or wrong way. Choose whatever feels most natural and accessible to you. Now here's what will happen within the first few seconds, and this is completely normal. Your mind will wander. Step 2. Notice when your mind has wandered. This is where most people think they've failed, but actually, this is where the real work begins. Your mind will drift to your to-do list, that conversation you had yesterday, what you're making for dinner, whether you're doing this right, anything and everything except your breath. You might find yourself planning your weekend, replaying an argument from last week, or worrying about something that might happen next month. You might start thinking about how you're supposed to be meditating and wondering if this is working. You might get lost in a fantasy or memory so completely that you forget you were ever trying to focus on breathing. All of this is not only normal, it's essential. Here's why. The moment you realize your mind has wandered is the moment you wake up inside your own consciousness. Think about what just happened. You were completely absorbed in thought, identified with whatever story your mind was telling. Then suddenly, awareness returned. You found yourself thinking about something other than your breath. That moment of noticing, that's meditation. That's exactly the capacity you're training. You're not trying to prevent your mind from wandering. You're strengthening your ability to recognize when it has wandered and to consciously redirect it. Step 3. Gently return your attention to your breath. This is perhaps the most important part of the entire practice. How you return matters more than the fact that you return. Don't drag your attention back to your breath like you're yanking a misbehaving dog on a leash. Don't scold yourself for getting distracted. Don't try to force your attention to stay put this time. Instead, return to your breath the way you might gently guide a friend who's lost in thought back to a conversation. With kindness, with patience, with the understanding that minds naturally wander, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's it. Those are the 3 steps. Focus, notice, return. Focus, notice, return. Over and over again throughout your meditation session. Now, let me tell you what you're really doing when you practice these 3 simple steps. You're going to the gym for your attention. Every time you notice your mind has wandered and gently bring it back, you're doing a mental rep. You're strengthening your capacity to choose consciously where you place your awareness rather than being at the mercy of whatever thoughts happen to arise. Think of it this way. If you went to a physical gym and lifted weights for 30 minutes, you wouldn't expect your muscles to be stronger immediately afterward. In fact, you might feel tired or even a little sore, but you would know that the workout was doing its job. You would trust that over time, with consistent practice, your muscles would grow stronger. Mental training works the same way. Each time you notice you've gotten lost in thought and return to your breath, you're building what we might call your attention muscle. You're developing the capacity to step out of autopilot and make conscious choices about what you focus on. This is why the monk's teacher told him something that completely changed his perspective. The thoughts actually help you meditate. At first, this made no sense to him. Weren't thoughts the enemy? Wasn't the whole point to get rid of them? But then he understood. If the goal is to practice returning your attention to your breath, you need something to return from. The thoughts that distract you are actually providing you with opportunities to exercise your awareness. Without them, there would be no meditation to do. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. You don't learn balance by never wobbling. You learn balance by wobbling and correcting, over and over, until your body develops an intuitive sense of how to stay upright. The wobbling isn't failure, it's how you learn. So here's a radical reframe that might change everything about how you approach meditation. Getting lost in thoughts and then returning to your breath isn't a sign that you're bad at meditation. It is meditation. The more often you get distracted and gently return, the stronger your attention becomes. The monk discovered this through his own experience. In the beginning, he could focus on his breath for maybe 3 or 4 seconds before his mind would wander off to planning, worrying, or remembering. He would get frustrated and think he was hopeless at this practice. But gradually, he began to see each return to the breath as a small victory rather than evidence of failure. He started to appreciate those moments of awakening when he would suddenly realize he'd been lost in thought. Instead of judging himself, he would think, "Oh, there I am again. How wonderful that awareness returned." This shift in perspective changed everything. Meditation stopped being a struggle against his mind and became a gentle training in presence and self-compassion. Let me give you some practical guidance for your own practice. Start with just 10 minutes a day. Not because 10 minutes is somehow magical, but because it's sustainable. It's better to meditate for 10 minutes every day than for an hour once a week. Consistency matters more than duration. Choose the same time each day if possible. Many people find that first thing in the morning works well because your mind hasn't yet gotten caught up in the day's activities. But any time that you can be consistent is the right time for you. Before you begin, set an intention. Not an intention for what you want to achieve or how you want to feel, but an intention of kindness toward yourself. Remember that you're doing this practice not only for your own well-being, but for your ability to be more present and compassionate in the world. During your practice, when you notice your mind has wandered, and it will, many times, resist the urge to analyze where it went or why it went there. Don't get into a story about what you were thinking about. Simply notice that thinking was happening and gently guide your attention back to your breath. Some days your mind will feel relatively calm and focused. Other days it will feel like a tornado of thoughts and emotions. Both experiences are equally valid forms of meditation. Your job is not to control what arises, but to practice returning to your anchor, your breath, with patience and kindness. After your meditation session, resist the urge to evaluate how it went. Don't ask yourself, was that good meditation or bad meditation? Don't try to figure out if you're making progress or doing it right. This kind of quality control actually undermines the practice. Remember, meditation is not about achieving a particular state of mind. It's about developing a different relationship with whatever states arise. Some sessions might feel peaceful and others might feel chaotic, but both are providing you with valuable training in presence and equanimity. The monk learned this the hard way when his teacher called him out for treating meditation like a drug. He had been sitting down with expectations of feeling good, waiting for meditation to give him some kind of high or relief. When it didn't, he felt disappointed and frustrated. His teacher pointed out that approaching meditation with the attitude of, "I need this to make me feel better," was actually coming from a place of lack. It was reinforcing the very mindset that created suffering in the first place. The belief that happiness comes from external circumstances, even if those circumstances are internal states achieved through meditation. Instead, the most powerful approach is to meditate without agenda. Sit down and practice simply because you're committed to developing greater awareness and compassion. Don't meditate to fix yourself or solve your problems or achieve enlightenment. Meditate because the capacity for presence and kindness is worth developing for its own sake. This might sound like a subtle distinction, but it makes all the difference in the world. When you stop trying to get something from your meditation practice, it becomes much more effective at giving you what you actually need. As the monk continued with this simple 3-step practice over the remaining years of his retreat, something profound began to shift. Not because his thoughts became more pleasant or his emotions more stable, but because his relationship to the entire landscape of his inner experience transformed. He was no longer at war with his mind. He had found a way to be present with whatever arose without being overwhelmed by it. The 3 steps had become second nature: focus, notice, return, not just during formal meditation sessions, but throughout his daily life. When that familiar voice of self-criticism would start its litany, he would simply notice, there's that voice again. When anxiety would flood his system, he would observe, anxiety is present right now. When memories of past trauma would surface, he would acknowledge, the past is visiting. And in each case, instead of being swept away by these experiences, he could return his attention to the present moment, to his breath, to the simple fact of being aware, to the spacious sky of consciousness that contained all weather but was touched by none of it. This practice gave him something he had never experienced before: choice. Choice about where to place his attention. Choice about how to respond rather than react. Choice about which thoughts to engage with and which to let pass by like clouds. But even this profound shift was just the beginning. The 3 sacred steps had laid the foundation for something even more transformative. They had taught him how to be present with his experience, but they hadn't yet taught him how to transform his relationship with suffering itself. Now comes the real transformation. Back in his retreat room, having returned from that desperate run over the monastery wall, the monk faced a choice that would determine the rest of his life. He could continue doing what he had been doing for 2 years, analyzing his pain, trying to understand it, fighting against it, running from it. Or he could try something that seemed completely counterintuitive. He could turn toward his suffering instead of away from it. What I'm about to share with you is the most powerful psychological technique he discovered in those 4 years of isolation. It's also the most misunderstood. So please, listen carefully, because this practice has the potential to transform your relationship with every difficult emotion you've ever experienced. The suffering he was experiencing felt very specific in his body. It wasn't just sadness or anxiety or depression as abstract concepts. It felt like a knife constantly twisting in his heart, a sharp, piercing sensation right in the center of his chest that would intensify whenever memories surfaced or when that critical voice would start its familiar assault. For 2 years, his entire focus had been on getting that knife out. He would try to understand why it was there. Was it because of the sexual abuse when he was 14? The family breakdown when he was 17? The years of self-destructive behavior? He became obsessed with the story of his pain, convinced that if he could just figure out the right explanation, the suffering would disappear. But something revolutionary happened when he stopped trying to remove the knife and instead decided to make it his meditation. This might sound strange, even dangerous, but here's what he discovered. When you move toward your pain instead of away from it, everything changes. How can something hurt you if you've decided to move toward it? You've made the choice. You're no longer a victim of the sensation. You're actively engaging with it. Let me explain exactly how this works, because understanding this principle could save you years of unnecessary suffering. When we experience emotional pain, we instinctively do one of two things. We either try to escape it or we try to solve it. We distract ourselves with work, food, shopping, substances, relationships, endless scrolling on our phones. Or we analyze it endlessly. Why do I feel this way? What caused this? How can I fix it? What's wrong with me? Both approaches, while completely understandable, actually keep us trapped in suffering. Here's why. When you're constantly trying to escape a feeling, you're reinforcing the belief that the feeling is dangerous and intolerable. Your nervous system learns to treat normal human emotions like life-threatening emergencies. And when you're constantly trying to solve a feeling through analysis, you're staying in your head instead of actually processing the emotion through your body, which is where emotional healing actually happens. The story, the narrative about why you feel the way you feel, becomes a trap. Not because the story isn't true or important, but because it keeps you thinking about the feeling instead of feeling the feeling. Think about it this way. If you cut your finger, you don't heal it by thinking about how you cut it or analyzing why you're the kind of person who cuts their finger. You heal it by cleaning the wound, applying pressure to stop the bleeding, and allowing your body's natural healing processes to work. Emotional wounds work similarly. They heal through direct contact with compassionate awareness, not through mental analysis. So here's what the monk learned to do instead. When that knife-like sensation would arise in his chest, instead of immediately launching into the story about it, "This is because of my trauma. This is because I'm broken. This is because of what happened to me," he would simply focus on the physical sensation itself. He would breathe into the area where he felt the pain, not trying to breathe it away, but breathing with it, breathing toward it. He would notice exactly what it felt like. Was it sharp or dull? Hot or cold? Moving or stationary? Tight or loose? He would try to feel the sensation without the judgment overlay. Not, "This is terrible," or "I hate this," or "Why is this happening to me again?" but simply the raw physical experience of the emotion in his body. This is much harder than it sounds because we're so used to immediately telling ourselves stories about our feelings. We feel anxious and immediately think, something bad is going to happen. We feel sad and think, my life is falling apart. We feel angry and think, this shouldn't be happening. But what if, just for a few moments, you could experience the pure sensation of the emotion without any story at all? The monk discovered that when he could stay with just the feeling in his body, something remarkable would happen. The sensation would begin to soften. Not immediately, not easily, but gradually, the sharp edges would start to melt. There's actually a physiological reason for this. When you're trying to push pain away, your body produces stress hormones like cortisol. When you relax into acceptance of what you're feeling, your body starts producing endorphins, natural painkillers, and mood elevators. The very act of accepting your pain triggers your body's healing response. But the transformation goes deeper than just physical chemistry. Something profound happens when you stop fighting against your own experience and start meeting it with curiosity and kindness. The monk began to develop a completely different relationship with that knife-like sensation in his chest. Instead of seeing it as an enemy to be defeated, he started relating to it like a frightened animal that needed care. He would imagine holding a scared rabbit or a bird with a broken wing, something that required the utmost gentleness and patience. This wasn't just visualization. He was learning to direct the same tenderness toward his own pain that he would naturally show to any wounded creature. And for someone who had spent decades being his own worst critic, this was revolutionary. For the first time in his life, he was treating himself with genuine compassion. Not the fake positive thinking kind of self-care, but the deep, unconditional kindness that you might show to a beloved friend who was suffering. Let me walk you through how you can begin to apply this practice in your own life. The next time you notice you're experiencing a difficult emotion, anxiety, sadness, anger, frustration, whatever it might be, try this gentle experiment. First, pause and locate the feeling in your body. Emotions always have a physical component. Anxiety might feel like a tight knot in your stomach or a flutter in your chest. Sadness might feel like a heaviness in your heart or a sinking sensation. Anger might feel like heat rising up through your torso or tension in your jaw and shoulders. Once you've found where the emotion lives in your body, resist the urge to immediately figure out why you're feeling this way or how to make it stop. Instead, bring your attention directly to the physical sensation. breathe into that area of your body, not to make the feeling go away, but to send breath and space and awareness to the place where you're hurting. Imagine you're breathing compassion directly into that sensation. If your mind starts spinning stories about the feeling, this is because of what happened yesterday, or I always feel like this, or there must be something wrong with me, gently redirect your attention back to the pure physical experience. What does it actually feel like in your body right now? Can you be curious about the sensation instead of immediately judging it as bad or trying to change it? Can you explore it the way a scientist might explore an interesting phenomenon, with genuine interest rather than resistance? Most importantly, can you meet this feeling with the same kindness you would offer to a good friend who was in pain? What would you say to someone you love who was experiencing exactly what you're experiencing right now? Can you say those same compassionate words to yourself? The monk found that this practice worked not just with emotional pain, but with physical discomfort as well. During his retreat, he began experiencing health problems that would persist for years after his teacher was murdered. Heart and lung issues that made breathing difficult and left him feeling ill much of the time. Instead of fighting against his sick body or becoming bitter about his physical limitations, he learned to apply the same principle. He would breathe compassion into the places where he hurt. He would send love to his struggling heart and lungs the way you might care for a beloved pet who wasn't feeling well. This didn't magically cure his health problems, but it completely changed his relationship to them. Instead of his illness being another source of suffering and frustration, it became an opportunity to practice unconditional self-compassion. The practice also transformed how he related to that critical voice in his head. When it would start its familiar litany, "You're disgusting, you're worthless, you'll never be good enough," instead of believing it or fighting against it, he would listen to it as if it were a very scared part of himself. He realized that this harsh inner critic was actually trying to protect him in the only way it knew how. It had learned that by criticizing him before anyone else could, it might keep him safe from rejection and abandonment. It was like a guard dog that had become so vigilant it was attacking everyone, including the person it was trying to protect. Instead of hating this voice, he began to feel compassion for it. He would mentally thank it for trying to keep him safe, then gently redirect his attention to the felt sense of being loved and accepted exactly as he was in this moment. This practice works because it addresses suffering at its root rather than just managing symptoms. Most of our emotional pain isn't actually caused by our circumstances. It's caused by our resistance to our circumstances. It's the story we tell ourselves about what's happening that creates the suffering, not the events themselves. When you learn to drop the story and be present with the pure feeling in your body, you discover something remarkable. Feelings, even very intense ones, are actually manageable when you're not fighting against them. They have a natural rhythm. They arise They peak, they begin to soften, and they pass away, but only if we let them complete their cycle, instead of interrupting it with resistance or analysis. The monk discovered that this practice could be applied to any difficult experience: grief over his teacher's death, anger at the person who murdered him, fear about his own health problems, loneliness during long periods of isolation. Each time, the process was the same: locate the feeling in the body, breathe compassion into it, stay present with the sensation without getting lost in stories about it, and allow it to soften and transform naturally. Over time, this practice created a profound shift in his entire nervous system. He was no longer at war with his own emotional experience. He had learned to be a safe harbor for whatever arose in his mind and body. He had become someone he could trust to handle whatever life brought his way. But perhaps most importantly, he had discovered that the very experiences he had spent his life trying to avoid, pain, sadness, fear, anger, could actually become doorways to deeper freedom and compassion. The knife in his heart, when met with love instead of resistance, had transformed into a source of profound healing. This leads to something profound. In that small retreat room, as the monk sat with the knife-like sensation in his chest, something extraordinary began to happen. As he breathed compassion into that place of pain, as he stopped fighting against his own suffering, an image spontaneously arose in his mind that would change everything. He saw himself holding a small, frightened rabbit. This wasn't a guided visualization or a meditation technique he had learned. It emerged naturally from his newfound willingness to meet his pain with tenderness instead of violence. The suffering in his chest, all that shame, trauma, and self-hatred, suddenly felt like a terrified animal that had been hiding in the darkness for decades, finally safe enough to reveal itself. Picture this with me for a moment. Imagine you found a small rabbit with a broken wing, shivering and afraid. What would be your natural response? Would you yell at it for being injured? Would you analyze why it got hurt? Would you demand that it stop being scared immediately? Of course not. You would gently gather it in your hands. You would speak softly to reassure it. You would hold it carefully, allowing it to feel safe and protected. You would tend to its wounds with patience and care, understanding that healing takes time. This is exactly the energy the monk learned to bring to his own inner wounds. For the first time in his life, he was treating the broken parts of himself with the same unconditional kindness he would naturally offer to any wounded creature. This was revolutionary because his entire relationship with himself had been built on criticism and rejection. From his earliest memories, there had been a voice in his head that never stopped pointing out his flaws, his failures, his inadequacies. That voice had gotten louder after the sexual abuse, after his parents' divorce, after every disappointment and trauma. By the time he became an adult, that inner critic had become a full-time job. It would wake up with him in the morning, already listing everything he should be worried about. It would narrate his day with a constant stream of judgment. You said the wrong thing. You look terrible. Everyone can see you don't belong here. You're going to fail. He had learned to believe this voice was trying to help him. Like many of us, he thought if he just criticized himself hard enough, pushed himself far enough, worried about enough possibilities, he would eventually become good enough to deserve love and acceptance. But that day never came. Instead, he lived in a constant state of internal warfare, exhausted from fighting battles against himself that could never be won. The frightened rabbit visualization changed all of this. Suddenly, he could see that the harshest critic inside his head wasn't some wise counselor trying to make him better. It was a terrified part of himself that had never learned any other way to stay safe. Think about when that critical voice first developed in your own life. For most of us, it formed when we were children who desperately needed love and belonging. If the adults around us were critical, we learned to criticize ourselves first to avoid their rejection. If our environment felt unpredictable or unsafe, we developed an internal alarm system that would scan constantly for potential threats or mistakes. That voice wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to protect us in the only way it knew how. But somewhere along the way, the guard dog became more dangerous than the threats it was supposed to guard against. The monk began to understand that his inner critic was like that frightened rabbit too. It needed compassion, not more criticism. It needed to be held with gentle understanding, not attacked or suppressed. This realization led to what might be the most important insight of his entire spiritual journey. You cannot hate yourself into becoming someone you love. For decades, he had been trying to improve himself through self-attack. He thought if he was just harsh enough with himself, eventually he would reach some standard that would earn him the right to feel okay about who he was. But self-hatred only creates more self-hatred. Criticism only breeds more criticism. What if the opposite were true? What if the path to becoming someone you could genuinely love started with loving who you already are? This doesn't mean becoming narcissistic or delusional about your flaws. It means recognizing that you're a human being who, like every other human being, is inherently worthy of kindness and care. Not because of what you've accomplished or how well you've performed, but simply because you exist. The monk's transformation from self-hatred to self-love didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process of learning to catch himself in moments of internal criticism and choosing a different response. Instead of joining in when that voice would start its familiar assault, "You're disgusting, you're worthless, you'll never be good enough," he would pause and ask himself, what would I say to a dear friend who was feeling this way? The answer was always radically different from what he was saying to himself. To a friend, he would offer understanding, encouragement, perspective. He would remind them of their strengths, their resilience, their basic goodness. He would hold space for their pain without making it worse with additional judgment. Slowly, he began to offer himself the same quality of care. When he noticed self-critical thoughts arising, he would mentally place his hand on his heart and speak to himself the way a loving parent might speak to a struggling child. This is really hard right now. It's okay to feel this way. You're doing the best you can. You are worthy of love exactly as you are. This practice felt awkward and artificial at first. After decades of self-attack, kindness toward himself felt foreign, even suspicious. Part of him worried that if he stopped being so hard on himself, he would become lazy, complacent, or arrogant. But the opposite happened. As he learned to treat himself with genuine compassion, he found he had more energy for growth and change, not less. When you're not constantly defending yourself against internal attacks, you have much more bandwidth for actually improving your life. This connects to one of the most misunderstood aspects of self-compassion. People often think acceptance means giving up or settling for less. They worry that if they accept themselves as they are, they'll lose motivation to change or grow. But true acceptance isn't resignation. It's the foundation for genuine transformation. Think about it this way. If you have a garden that's not thriving, you don't berate the plants for not growing fast enough. You study the conditions, the soil, the light, the water, and you make adjustments from a place of understanding and care. Self-compassion works the same way. When you can look at your struggles and limitations with curious kindness instead of harsh judgment, you're much more likely to understand what actually needs to change and to have the emotional resources to make those changes. The monk's story about his acting career illustrates this perfectly. For years, he had pursued performing not from genuine passion, but from a desperate need to prove he was worthy of love and admiration. He had created this glamorous persona to hide what he saw as his disgusting, shameful true self. Even as a monk, he continued this pattern for a while. He developed intense attachments to friendships, constantly seeking reassurance and validation from others because he couldn't give it to himself. He couldn't spend time alone with his own company because he found himself so unpleasant to be with. But as he learned to hold that frightened rabbit of his inner pain with genuine tenderness, something shifted fundamentally. He no longer needed external validation to feel okay about himself. He could be alone without being lonely because he had finally become a friend to himself. This transformation wasn't about becoming perfect or eliminating all his difficult emotions. He still experienced sadness, anxiety, anger, and fear. But now he could hold these feelings the way a loving parent holds a crying child, with presence, understanding, and unconditional care. Let me share some practical techniques you can use to begin cultivating this same quality of self-compassion in your own life. The next time you notice your inner critic starting its familiar commentary, try this simple practice. Place one hand on your heart and take a deep breath. Feel the warmth and gentle pressure of your hand. This physical gesture sends a signal to your nervous system that you're safe and cared for. Then, speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love, who was going through exactly what you're going through. Use the same tone of voice, the same words of comfort and encouragement. If it feels too strange to speak to yourself directly, imagine you're speaking to a younger version of yourself who needs your protection and guidance. Another powerful technique is to write yourself a letter from the perspective of an unconditionally loving friend. This friend sees all your struggles and imperfections clearly, but also sees your fundamental goodness, your efforts to grow, your basic humanity. What would this friend want you to know? How would they describe your situation with both honesty and compassion? You can also practice the frightened rabbit visualization directly. When you're experiencing emotional pain, imagine that pain as a small, scared animal that needs your care. Picture yourself gently gathering it in your hands, offering it safety and warmth. Notice how this changes your relationship to the difficult feeling. The monk discovered that these practices were particularly powerful when applied to forgiveness, both of himself and others. For years, he had carried resentment toward the people who had hurt him, thinking that holding on to anger was somehow protecting him or demanding justice. But he came to understand that forgiveness isn't about condoning harmful behavior or pretending that hurtful things didn't happen. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the toxic burden of carrying someone else's actions in your body and mind. The traditional metaphor says that holding on to resentment is like grasping a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. You're the one getting burned. When you forgive, you're not letting the other person get away with anything. You're putting down the coal so your own hands can heal. This understanding helped him process even the most difficult relationship in his life, with the man who murdered his beloved teacher. The killer had been a monk in their monastery, someone they knew well. The betrayal felt almost unbearable. But gradually, through practicing the same compassion techniques he used on himself, the monk was able to see that this person must have been suffering tremendously to commit such an act. This didn't excuse the behavior, but it allowed him to release the rage that was poisoning his own system. He realized that forgiveness isn't a feeling you have to generate. It's a choice you make to stop carrying someone else's actions as a burden in your own life. You don't forgive because you feel like it. You forgive because you want to be free. The same principle applies to self-forgiveness. You don't have to feel good about your past mistakes to stop punishing yourself for them. You just have to recognize that continuing to attack yourself for things you can't change is not helping anyone, including yourself. This practice of radical self-compassion gradually dissolved that voice of constant self-criticism that had tormented him for decades. Not because he became perfect, but because he learned to relate to his imperfections with kindness instead of violence. he discovered that the frightened rabbit of his pain, when held with enough love and patience, could transform into a source of wisdom and strength. The very experiences that had once made him feel broken and ashamed became the foundation for deep compassion toward himself and others. The parts of himself he had spent his life trying to hide or fix revealed themselves to be the source of his greatest gifts. His sensitivity, which had made him vulnerable to hurt, also made him incredibly empathetic. His struggles with mental health gave him profound understanding of suffering that would help thousands of people find their own healing. This is the revolution of self-compassion. It doesn't make you soft, or weak, or complacent. It makes you strong enough to face reality without armor, brave enough to be vulnerable, resilient enough to keep going when things get difficult. Most importantly, it makes you available to offer others the same quality of presence and acceptance that you've learned to give yourself. You can't give what you don't have. When you learn to love yourself unconditionally, that love naturally overflows to everyone around you. This can transform your daily life. When the monk emerged from his 4-year retreat, the world had changed dramatically. Smartphones were everywhere. Social media had exploded into existence. People walked down the street with their faces buried in glowing screens. The pace of life had accelerated beyond anything he could have imagined. But rather than feeling overwhelmed by this new digital landscape, he discovered something remarkable. The practices he had learned in isolation, particularly the ability to find pockets of peace within chaos, were more relevant than ever. In fact, they were exactly what this hyper-connected, constantly stimulated world desperately needed. The secret wasn't to retreat from modern life or throw away your phone and move to a mountain. The secret was to find freedom right in the middle of the madness. Here's what he discovered that can transform your daily experience. Every moment of your life contains a choice point. A tiny gap between what happens to you and how you respond to it. Most of the time, we're completely unconscious of this gap. Something occurs, and we react automatically, like biological machines, following pre-programmed responses. But when you learn to recognize these micro moments of choice, everything changes. You stop being at the mercy of your circumstances and start becoming the author of your own experience. Let me paint you a picture of how this works in real life. You're standing in line at the coffee shop, and it's moving incredibly slowly. The person ahead of you is asking complicated questions about every item on the menu. You have somewhere important to be, and you can feel your stress levels rising. Your shoulders start to tense. Your jaw clenches. That familiar voice in your head starts its commentary. This is ridiculous. Why didn't I leave earlier? I'm going to be late. This always happens to me. This is the fork in the road the monk learned to recognize. In every moment like this, You're standing at an intersection between two completely different paths. One path is the road of reaction. You follow your conditioned patterns automatically. You get irritated, check your phone, maybe sigh loudly, or look around for someone else to share your frustration with. You spend the next 10 minutes in a state of low-level stress, and when you finally get your coffee, you're already depleted before your day has really begun. The other path is the road of response. You pause and recognize this moment as an opportunity to practice something that will make you stronger, calmer, and more free. Here's what the monk learned to do in situations like this, and what you can learn to do too. Instead of immediately reaching for your phone or getting caught up in irritation, try this simple practice. Feel the ground under your feet. Literally, notice the solid contact between your shoes and the floor. Feel the weight of your body being supported by the earth beneath you. This might sound almost too simple to be meaningful, but something profound happens when you shift your attention from your mental commentary to your physical presence. You drop out of the story about how this situation shouldn't be happening and into the reality of what actually is happening. Next, bring your attention to your shoulders. Notice if they've crept up toward your ears with tension. Consciously let them drop and soften. Take a gentle breath and allow your jaw to unclench. Now, instead of seeing this weight as time being stolen from you, try reframing it as time being given to you. A few minutes of stillness in your busy day. A chance to just be present without having to accomplish anything. A gift of space that you didn't have to schedule or create. You might even go a step further and become curious about your surroundings. Really look at the people around you. Notice the morning light coming through the windows. Appreciate the smell of coffee and pastries. Let yourself be fully here, instead of mentally rushing to wherever you think you need to be next. What you're doing in these micro moments is literally rewiring your brain. Every time you choose awareness over automaticity, presence over reactivity, you're strengthening neural pathways that serve your well-being instead of your stress response. Think about it this way. Your nervous system has learned that being stuck in lines, trapped in traffic, or delayed by circumstances is a threat that requires immediate activation of fight or flight mode. But when you repeatedly choose a calm, aware response to these situations, you're teaching your nervous system a new pattern. You're showing it that these moments of slowness or delay are actually safe and can even be enjoyable. The monk discovered that this practice works in any situation where you feel stuck or powerless. Waiting for the elevator, sitting in traffic, standing in security lines at the airport, holding for customer service on the phone, even waiting for a slow website to load, or for someone to respond to a text message. These moments, which most people experience as frustrating obstacles to their real life, can become opportunities to practice the most important skill you'll ever develop: the ability to be okay, regardless of your external circumstances. Let me give you another example of how this works. You're driving to work, and suddenly, traffic comes to a complete standstill. Construction, an accident, whatever it is, you're not moving. Your first impulse might be to grip the steering wheel tighter, check your phone for alternate routes, maybe even pound the dashboard in frustration. But what if you use this forced pause as a meditation retreat? Turn off the radio and sit in the silence for a moment. Notice what it feels like to have nowhere to go and nothing to do except be present. Feel your hands resting on the steering wheel. Take 3 conscious breaths, longer than you normally would. Look around at the other drivers. Notice that you're all in the same situation together. Send a little mental goodwill to the people in the cars around you. They're probably feeling just as frustrated as you were a moment ago. This simple act of extending compassion to others immediately shifts you out of victim mode and into a more spacious, generous state of mind. Here's where it gets really interesting. The monk found that as he practiced these micro moments of mindfulness consistently, something unexpected happened. He started to actually look forward to situations that used to stress him out. Traffic jams became opportunities for breath meditation. Long lines became chances to practice patience and presence. Delayed flights became gifts of unscheduled time to simply be still. Instead of these circumstances controlling his emotional state, he was using them as a kind of informal meditation retreat, scattered throughout his daily life. This shift from victim to practitioner is one of the most empowering transformations you can make. When you stop seeing difficult circumstances as things that happen to you and start seeing them as opportunities to strengthen your capacity for presence and peace, you become genuinely fearless. But let's be practical about this. I'm not suggesting you need to become some kind of blissed out person who never feels frustrated or impatient. The goal isn't to eliminate all negative emotions or to pretend that delays and inconveniences aren't genuinely annoying sometimes. The goal is to develop choice in how you respond, to create space between what happens and your reaction to what happens, to build your capacity to remain centered and clear-headed, even when life doesn't go according to plan. One of the most powerful ways to practice this is to create what the monk calls phone-free pockets of peace throughout your day. These are moments where, instead of immediately reaching for your device when you have a few minutes of downtime, you choose to simply be present with yourself and your surroundings. For example, when you're walking from your car to a building, instead of scrolling through messages, try walking mindfully. Feel each step. Notice the temperature of the air on your skin. Look around and actually see what's in your environment, instead of moving through it unconsciously. Listen to the sounds around you: birds, traffic, conversations, the wind in the trees. When you're waiting for an appointment, instead of diving into social media, try a few minutes of informal meditation. Close your eyes or soften your gaze and simply follow your breath. Notice what it feels like to not be consuming information for a few minutes. Let your nervous system experience what stillness feels like in the middle of a busy day. This isn't about demonizing technology or your phone. It's about reclaiming your agency over your own attention. Most of us have become so accustomed to constant stimulation that we've forgotten what it feels like to just be with ourselves without any entertainment or distraction. The monk discovered that our devices have trained us to expect immediate gratification and constant input. When there's a lull in activity, we automatically reach for our phones, not because we have anything specific we need to check, but because silence and stillness have become uncomfortable. We've lost the ability to be bored, to daydream, to let our minds wander naturally. But here's what he found. Those moments of unstimulated presence are where your deepest creativity, insight, and peace emerge. When you're constantly feeding your mind information, there's no space for wisdom to arise. When you're always responding to external input, there's no opportunity to hear your own inner guidance. Try this experiment for just one day. Notice how many times you reach for your phone when you have a moment of downtime. Don't judge yourself for it. Just become aware of the impulse. Then, once in a while, choose not to pick it up. See what it feels like to just sit with yourself for a few minutes, without any external stimulation. You might notice some restlessness at first, maybe even a little anxiety. This is completely normal. Your nervous system has been trained to expect constant input. But if you can breathe through the initial discomfort, you'll often find that a natural calm emerges underneath the restlessness. These micro moments of freedom also serve as a kind of preventive medicine for stress and overwhelm. Instead of accumulating tension throughout the day until you finally explode or collapse, you're releasing it in real time through brief moments of conscious relaxation and presence. The practice becomes like having reset buttons scattered throughout your day. Every time you choose awareness over automaticity, you're returning to a state of calm alertness instead of unconscious reactivity. You're giving your nervous system permission to relax instead of constantly preparing for the next emergency that probably isn't coming. Over time, this changes your entire baseline state. Instead of living in chronic low-level stress, punctuated by moments of relief, you start living in fundamental okayness, punctuated by temporary challenges that you can meet with equanimity. The monk learned to apply this principle even in the most mundane activities. Washing dishes became a meditation on the feeling of warm water and soap bubbles. Walking upstairs became an opportunity to feel his muscles working and his heart beating. Eating meals became a practice in really tasting food instead of consuming it unconsciously while thinking about something else. Even something as simple as opening a door could become a moment of mindfulness. Feel the weight of the door, the texture of the handle, the resistance as it swings open. These tiny acts of presence might seem insignificant, but they add up to create a completely different quality of engagement with your daily life. This isn't about making every moment some kind of forced spiritual practice. It's about recognizing that every moment already contains everything you need to feel connected, present, and at peace. You don't have to add anything to your experience. You just have to show up fully for the experience you're already having. What makes this approach so powerful is that it meets you exactly where you are. You don't need to change your schedule, buy any equipment, or learn any complicated techniques. You just need to remember that right now, in this moment, you have the opportunity to choose presence over distraction, awareness over automaticity. The transformation happens gradually and naturally. At first, you might remember to practice these micro moments of mindfulness only occasionally. But as you experience the immediate benefits, feeling more calm, more grounded, more in control of your own emotional state, you'll naturally want to practice them more often. Eventually, this way of being becomes second nature. You develop what Buddhist teachers call continuous mindfulness, a background awareness that remains steady, regardless of what's happening in the foreground of your experience. You become someone who can stay centered in chaos, calm in crisis, present in the midst of pressure. Not because you've eliminated all stress from your life, but because you've developed an unshakable capacity to meet whatever arises with clarity and grace. This is what the monk discovered during those years after his retreat. He could be just as effective, just as productive, just as engaged with life as anyone else. But underneath all the activity, there was a quality of stillness and peace that no external circumstance could disturb. He had learned to make every moment sacred, not through elaborate rituals or special practices, but through the simple act of being fully present for his own life. Whether he was teaching meditation to stressed executives, counseling people through difficult times, or just standing in line at the grocery store, he was practicing the same fundamental skill, choosing awareness over unconsciousness, response over reaction, presence over distraction. But what is it about these ancient teachings that makes them so transformative? "2,500 years ago, a prince named Siddhartha discovered something that would revolutionize how we understand the human mind and its capacity for both suffering and liberation. What he found wasn't just a path to personal peace, but a practical system for transforming the very mental patterns that create self-hate and compulsive thinking. Today, some of the world's most successful leaders have quietly turned to these ancient teachings. Ray Dalio, who built one of the largest hedge funds in history, says meditation is the biggest ingredient of whatever success I've had. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, calls meditation the most important thing I do each day. Jack Dorsey credits meditation as having more impact on his work than anything else. They've discovered what the Buddha taught, that the quality of your mind determines the quality of your life. But what specific teachings create this transformation? The Buddha's first profound insight was what he called the Four Noble Truths, a diagnosis of human suffering and its cure. The first truth is that suffering is an inevitable part of existence, but not in the way most people think. The Buddha distinguished between pain and suffering. Pain is unavoidable. We all experience illness, aging, loss, and death. But suffering is optional. Suffering is what we add to pain through our mental resistance to what's happening. Self-hatred is a perfect example of this distinction. You might make a mistake or face a setback. That's the pain. But then your mind creates a story. I'm such a failure. I always mess things up. I'm fundamentally flawed. That's the suffering you're adding to the original pain. The second truth reveals the cause of this additional suffering, what the Buddha called tanha, or craving. This isn't just wanting things. It's the compulsive mental grasping that keeps us constantly seeking something different from what's happening right now. We crave pleasure and push away pain. We crave certainty and resist uncertainty. We crave a perfect version of ourselves and attack the imperfect version we think we are. Overthinking is craving inaction. Your mind becomes convinced that if it just thinks hard enough, analyzes long enough, worries thoroughly enough, it can control outcomes and eliminate uncertainty. But this mental churning creates the very anxiety it's trying to solve. The third truth offers hope. This suffering can end. Not through getting everything you want or becoming a perfect person, but through transforming your relationship with wanting itself. The fourth truth provides the path, what Buddhism calls the Noble Eightfold Path. But rather than 8 separate practices, this is really 8 aspects of living with wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. One of the most relevant aspects for modern minds is what the Buddha called right effort. This teaching directly addresses the exhausting internal warfare that characterizes self-hatred and compulsive thinking. Right effort isn't about trying harder or forcing yourself to be different. It's about learning the difference between skillful effort and unskillful effort. Skillful effort is like tending a garden, providing the right conditions for growth without trying to force plants to bloom faster. Unskillful effort is like yanking on flowers to make them grow taller. Most people approach their mental problems with unskillful effort. They try to force themselves to stop thinking negative thoughts, to immediately feel better, to become enlightened quickly. This creates more tension and resistance, not less. Steve Jobs, who practiced Zen Buddhism throughout his career, understood this principle deeply. He said, "If you try to calm the mind, it only makes it worse. But over time, it does calm." His minimalist design philosophy reflected this understanding. He removed complexity not by force, but by patiently discerning what was essential. Another aspect of the Eightfold Path that directly transforms self-hatred is right speech. But this includes how you speak to yourself. Buddhism teaches that words have tremendous power to create reality. When you constantly tell yourself harsh things, you're literally programming your nervous system to experience those harsh realities. Right speech toward yourself means speaking with the same kindness and honesty you would use with a dear friend who was struggling. It means being truthful about areas where you want to grow without being cruel about your current limitations. It means recognizing that the voice of harsh self-criticism isn't wisdom. It's often fear disguised as motivation. Another crucial teaching is the Buddha's understanding of what he called mental formations, the habitual patterns of thinking and feeling that run automatically in our minds. Self-criticism and compulsive worry are mental formations that developed as survival strategies, often in childhood when we needed to anticipate threats or meet others' expectations to feel safe. Buddhism teaches that these formations can be transformed through a process called mental purification. This isn't about becoming pure in a moral sense, but about clearing away the mental habits that obscure your natural clarity and peace. It's like cleaning a mirror. You're not adding anything new, just removing what prevents you from seeing clearly. The practice works through what Buddhist teachers call mindful awareness. Instead of being carried away by mental formations, you learn to recognize them as they arise. There's the self-criticism pattern starting up. There's the worry cycle beginning. This recognition itself begins to dissolve their power over you. Mark Benioff's daily meditation practice exemplifies this approach. He's not trying to achieve some perfect mental state, but developing the capacity to recognize and work skillfully with whatever mental patterns arise during his day of leading a massive organization. Buddhism also introduces the profound concept of Buddha nature, the idea that every person already possesses the capacity for awakening and freedom. This isn't something you need to earn or achieve through perfect behavior. It's your fundamental nature, temporarily obscured by mental habits and conditioning. This teaching completely undermines the foundation of self-hatred. If your essential nature is already whole and pure awareness, then what is there to hate? The parts of yourself you judge so harshly are simply temporary clouds passing through the vast sky of your true nature. You can work on changing behaviors or developing skills without attacking your basic worthiness as a human being. Perhaps the most revolutionary Buddhist teaching for addressing self-hatred is the practice of metta, or loving kindness. This isn't just being nice to yourself, but a systematic training in unconditional friendliness toward your own experience. The practice begins with directing kindness toward yourself. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. For people trapped in self-hatred, this can feel almost impossible at first. But the practice works gradually, like water slowly wearing away stone. Buddhism teaches that your fundamental nature is already pure awareness and compassion. Self-hatred isn't your true nature. It's a learned pattern that covers over your inherent goodness, like clouds covering the Sunday. Loving kindness practice helps you reconnect with this basic okayness that exists beneath all your mental stories about yourself. The traditional loving-kindness practice then extends to others, loved ones, neutral people, difficult people, and eventually all beings everywhere. This expansion isn't just altruistic, it has a profound psychological effect. When you practice sending goodwill to others, you develop the neural pathways of kindness and compassion that naturally include yourself. Oprah Winfrey, another successful practitioner, speaks about how meditation helped her develop what she calls the highest, truest expression of yourself. She discovered that underneath all the roles and identities and achievements, there's a peaceful presence that remains constant and unshakable. The Buddha also taught about what he called papaññica, mental proliferation, or the tendency of the mind to elaborate simple experiences into complex stories. You feel a momentary sensation of sadness, and within seconds your mind has constructed an entire narrative about why you're sad, what it means about your life, how long it will last, and what you should do about it. Overthinking is papaññica in overdrive. One worry spawns 10 more worries. One self-critical thought generates an avalanche of related judgments. The mind becomes like a hall of mirrors, reflecting and re-reflecting its own projections infinitely. Buddhist practice teaches you to catch this proliferation process early, before it gains momentum. You learn to notice the difference between a simple feeling or thought and the elaborate mental commentary that typically follows. This allows you to experience emotions directly, without getting lost in stories about them. Ray Dalio's investment success demonstrates this principle beautifully. In financial markets, emotional reactions to wins and losses typically lead to poor decision-making. His meditation practice helped him develop the capacity to experience the feelings that come with success and failure, without getting caught in emotional narratives that would cloud his judgment. Another essential teaching is the Buddhist concept of refuge. Traditional Buddhism speaks of taking refuge in the Buddha, the teachings, and the community of practitioners. But the deeper meaning is about learning to take refuge in your own awakened awareness rather than seeking security through external accomplishments or others' approval. This directly addresses one of the root causes of both self-hatred and overthinking, the belief that your worth depends on external validation or perfect performance. When you learn to find refuge in your own awareness, in the simple fact of being conscious and alive, you develop an unshakable foundation that no external circumstance can threaten. Jack Dorsey's ability to navigate the intense pressures of running social media companies reflects this understanding. His meditation practice provides a stable center that remains calm regardless of external turbulence. Stock prices, public criticism, competitive pressures, or internal company challenges. Buddhism also teaches about the middle way, avoiding extremes of indulgence and deprivation. In terms of mental patterns, this means neither suppressing difficult thoughts and emotions, nor being completely consumed by them. You learn to acknowledge what's arising in your mind without either pushing it away or drowning in it. This balanced approach is crucial for working with self-criticism. You don't try to eliminate all self-evaluation, which would make learning and growth impossible. But you also don't allow harsh self-judgment to run rampant. You develop discernment about when self-reflection is helpful and when it becomes self-attack. The Buddhist teaching of dependent origination also provides profound insight into the nature of mental suffering. This principle states that nothing exists independently. Everything arises in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions. Your current mental state isn't a fixed characteristic of who you are, but the result of temporary conditions that can be changed. This understanding brings tremendous hope to people who feel trapped by patterns of self-hatred or compulsive thinking. These patterns didn't arise from nowhere, and they don't have to continue indefinitely. By changing the mental and emotional conditions that sustain them, you can transform even the most entrenched habits. The Buddhist understanding of karma also transforms how you relate to your mental patterns. Karma isn't about cosmic punishment or reward, but about the simple truth that actions have consequences. Mental actions, thoughts, attitudes, emotional habits create mental consequences. Self-hatred creates more self-hatred. Compassion creates more compassion. This understanding brings tremendous hope. If your current mental patterns were created through past mental actions, they can be transformed through different mental actions starting right now. Every moment offers the opportunity to plant seeds of kindness rather than seeds of criticism, awareness rather than confusion. Buddhist meditation also develops what teachers call equanimity, the capacity to remain balanced whether circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or indifferent. It means developing the inner stability to feel your emotions fully, without being overwhelmed by them or needing to immediately escape from them. For business leaders, this quality is invaluable. Markets fluctuate, deals fall through, employees leave, competitors emerge, but underneath all this activity, there can be a quality of unshakable peace that allows for clear decision-making, regardless of external turbulence. Perhaps most importantly, Buddhism teaches that liberation from mental suffering isn't a distant goal to achieve someday, but a capacity that can be accessed in any moment. Freedom isn't something you get, it's something you are when you stop creating mental prisons through unconscious thinking patterns. This is why successful leaders find Buddhist practices so practical. They're not seeking some mystical experience, but developing mental skills that have immediate practical applications. Clarity under pressure, emotional regulation during crises, the ability to make decisions without being clouded by personal reactivity. The monk discovered that when you combine these teachings with consistent practice, something remarkable happens. The mental patterns that once seemed solid and permanent reveal themselves to be fluid and workable. Self-hatred loses its grip, when you stop feeding it with belief and attention. Overthinking naturally settles when you stop trying to solve every problem through mental analysis. You don't become perfect or problem-free, but you develop what Buddhist teachers call mental sovereignty, the capacity to remain free and aware regardless of what thoughts and emotions are passing through your consciousness. You become the sky that can contain any weather without being disturbed by it. These ancient teachings offer something that no amount of external success can provide: genuine inner peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. When you have this foundation, you can pursue your goals with full energy while remaining fundamentally okay whether you achieve them or not. You can care deeply about outcomes while not being destroyed by setbacks. You can work hard for success while finding fulfillment in the present moment. Now let's make this yours. Here we are, near the end of our journey together, and perhaps you're feeling something you might not have expected. Not just inspiration or understanding, but a quiet sense that something fundamental has shifted in how you relate to your own mind. That shift is the beginning of everything. But inspiration alone won't transform your daily experience. Knowledge without practice is like having a map, but never taking the journey. So, let's talk about how to make these ancient teachings real in your modern life. The monk discovered something crucial during his years of teaching. The people who experienced the most profound transformation weren't necessarily the ones who meditated for hours each day or attended every retreat. They were the ones who committed to showing up consistently, even when it felt difficult, even when they didn't feel like it, even when it seemed like nothing was happening. Let's start with what he learned is the most sustainable approach: a simple 10-minute morning practice. 10 minutes might not sound like much, but it's enough to create visible changes in your brain after just 4 days of practice. More importantly, it's a commitment you can actually keep. It's better to meditate for 10 minutes every day than for an hour once a week. Consistency matters more than duration. Why morning? There are both practical and physiological reasons. Practically, morning is when you have the most control over your schedule. As the day progresses, other people's needs and unexpected demands can hijack your time. But those first few minutes after you wake up belong to you. Physiologically, your cortisol levels spike naturally when you wake up. It's your body's way of preparing you for the day ahead. But meditation can help bring those stress hormones back into balance before you even encounter your first real challenge. You're setting the tone for your entire day. Here's exactly how to structure your 10-minute practice. First, find a quiet place where you won't be interrupted. This doesn't have to be elaborate. A corner of your bedroom, a chair in your living room, even sitting on the edge of your bed works perfectly. Sit comfortably with your spine naturally upright. You don't need to sit cross-legged on the floor unless that feels comfortable for you. Before you even close your eyes, take a moment to set an intention. This isn't about what you want to achieve or how you want to feel. This is about remembering why you're here. Place your hand on your heart and silently say something like, "I'm doing this practice not only for my own well-being, but for all the people whose lives I touch. By developing greater peace and clarity in my own mind, I become more able to offer presence and kindness to others." This isn't selfish. It's one of the most generous things I can do. Setting this intention of compassion transforms meditation from a self-improvement project into an act of service. When you approach the practice this way, it becomes easier to stick with it on difficult days. You're not just doing this for yourself, you're doing it for everyone who benefits when you're more patient, more present, more kind. Now, become aware of your body. Feel your hands resting wherever they are. Notice your shoulders and allow any tension to drop away naturally. You're not trying to force relaxation, just inviting it. Bring your attention to the front of your body and start to notice your breathing. Remember, you're not trying to breathe in any particular way. Just let your breath be natural and use it as an anchor for your attention. You might focus on the rising and falling of your chest, or the sensation of air moving in and out through your nostrils. And then, inevitably, your mind will wander. This is not a problem to solve. It's the practice itself. When you notice you've gotten lost in thoughts, gently guide your attention back to your breath. The gentleness of this return is crucial. Think of it like training a puppy. When a puppy wanders off, you don't scream at it or punish it. You call it back with kindness and patience, knowing that eventually it will learn to stay close. Your attention is like that puppy. It needs gentle, consistent guidance, not harsh discipline. After about 8 minutes of this breath-focused practice, end with another moment of intention. Dedicate whatever peace or clarity you've touched during your practice to the benefit of all beings. This isn't just a nice gesture, it's a way of connecting your personal practice to something larger than yourself. Now, let's address something that stops many people before they even begin: resistance. Your mind will offer you 1,000 reasons why you can't meditate today. You don't have time. You're too stressed. You have too much to do. You're not in the right mood. Your mind is too busy. The monk learned to see this resistance not as a problem, but as valuable information about how his mind worked. The resistance itself became part of his practice. Instead of fighting against it or feeling guilty about it, he would simply notice, there's resistance arising. How interesting. Sometimes resistance shows up as physical restlessness. You sit down to meditate and immediately feel like you need to get up and do something else. Your body feels fidgety, uncomfortable, like you're wasting precious time. When this happens, try this gentle approach. Instead of forcing yourself to sit still, acknowledge the restlessness. I notice my body wants to move right now. That's okay. Then make a conscious choice to stay present with the feeling of restlessness rather than acting on it immediately. This isn't about suppressing the feeling, but about developing the capacity to be present with uncomfortable sensations without immediately needing to escape them. This skill will serve you in countless situations throughout your day. Sometimes resistance shows up as mental arguments about the value of meditation itself. This is stupid. This isn't working. I should be doing something productive instead. When these thoughts arise, you can work with them the same way you work with any other thought during meditation. Notice them, acknowledge them. There's doubt arising, and gently return your attention to your breath. You don't need to argue with these thoughts or convince yourself they're wrong. You just need to practice not being controlled by them. Which brings us to perhaps the most important thing to understand about meditation. There's no such thing as a bad meditation session. The monk's teacher told him something that completely changed his relationship to practice. The meditation where your mind is calm and focused and the meditation where your mind is agitated and distracted are equally valuable. This might sound counterintuitive, but think about it this way. If you went to the gym and the weights felt heavy, would you consider that a failed workout? Of course not. The resistance is what makes your muscles stronger. Mental training works the same way. On days when your mind feels particularly busy or distracted, you're getting an especially good workout for your attention. Every time you notice you've gotten lost in thought and gently return to your breath, you're doing exactly what meditation is designed to help you do. There will be sessions where you feel peaceful and focused. There will be sessions where your mind feels like a tornado. Both are perfect opportunities to practice. The goal isn't to achieve any particular state, but to develop a different relationship with whatever states arise. This understanding is crucial because it addresses one of the biggest obstacles to consistent practice: the belief that meditation is working only when it feels good. Many people quit after a few sessions because they expect to feel immediately calmer or more peaceful. When they don't experience that, they assume they're doing it wrong. But meditation isn't a feel-good practice in the way most people imagine. It's more like brushing your teeth. You don't brush your teeth because it feels amazing. You brush them because it's good for your health over time. The benefits accumulate gradually, often below the threshold of conscious awareness. You might not notice dramatic changes day to day, but after several weeks of consistent practice, you may realize that you're handling stress differently. That voice of self-criticism might be a little quieter. You might find yourself pausing before reacting in difficult situations. Small shifts that create profound changes in the quality of your daily experience. Building consistency without force requires what Buddhist teachers call intelligent effort. This means being strategic about removing obstacles to practice, rather than relying purely on willpower. Set yourself up for success by preparing everything the night before. Choose where you'll sit. Maybe even place a cushion or blanket there. Set out whatever you need. Remove as many decisions as possible from your morning routine. Start with a commitment you know you can keep. If 10 minutes feels overwhelming, start with 5. If 5 minutes feels like too much, start with 3. It's better to meditate for 3 minutes every day for a month than to meditate for 20 minutes twice and then give up. You can also link your meditation practice to something you already do consistently. Maybe you always have coffee first thing in the morning. You could commit to meditating for 10 minutes before you allow yourself that first cup. This creates what psychologists call a habit stack, linking a new behavior to an established routine. Be gentle with yourself when you miss days. And you will miss days. Everyone does. The monk discovered that people who developed sustainable practices weren't the ones who never missed a session. They were the ones who could miss a day or even a week and then return to practice without drowning in guilt or giving up entirely. When you do miss a session, try talking to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend. I missed my meditation this morning. That's okay. I'm human. I can start again tomorrow. This kind of self-compassion actually makes you more likely to return to practice, not less. As your practice develops, you might find yourself drawn to deeper exploration. Many people discover that attending a meditation retreat can accelerate their understanding and deepen their commitment to practice. Retreats don't have to be month-long affairs in remote monasteries. Many Buddhist centers offer weekend retreats, day-long retreats, or even half-day programs. The value isn't in the duration, but in the opportunity to practice in a supportive environment with experienced teachers and other practitioners. There's something powerful about being in a room full of people who are all working with their minds in the same way you are. It normalizes the experience of having a busy, resistant, or difficult mind. You realize that everyone struggles with the same challenges you do. That voice that tells you you're uniquely bad at meditation starts to lose its credibility. Buddhist centers also offer the gift of community. Meditation can sometimes feel like a solitary pursuit, but it's traditionally been practiced in the context of supportive relationships with teachers and fellow practitioners. Having people in your life who understand what you're doing and why can be incredibly encouraging. If attending a retreat or finding a local Buddhist center isn't possible for you right now, there are many online communities and resources. The key is finding some form of support and guidance beyond just your individual practice. Even reading books by experienced teachers or listening to talks by respected meditation instructors can provide the encouragement and instruction you need. Remember that Buddhism has been refined and transmitted for over 2,500 years. Millions of people have walked this path before you, facing the same mental obstacles and discovering the same fundamental truths about the nature of mind and suffering. You're not trying to figure this out alone. The monk also learned the importance of bringing mindfulness into daily activities, not just formal sitting meditation. You can practice the same quality of present moment awareness while walking, eating, washing dishes, or waiting in line. These informal practices often feel more accessible than sitting meditation and can be just as transformative. Try this experiment. Choose one routine activity you do every day and commit to doing it mindfully for a week. Maybe it's brushing your teeth, making coffee, or walking to your car. Instead of letting your mind wander to the day ahead or yesterday's concerns, bring your full attention to the physical sensations and movements involved in the activity. Notice how this changes your experience of that activity. You might find that even mundane tasks become more interesting and satisfying when you're fully present for them. This is a taste of what it means to live meditatively. As we've explored throughout this journey, the ultimate goal isn't to become a perfect meditator or to achieve some special state of consciousness. The goal is to develop the capacity to be genuinely present for your own life, to meet whatever arises, joy or sorrow, success or failure, clarity or confusion, with awareness and compassion. The practices we've discussed are like tools in a toolkit. Different tools are useful for different situations. Sometimes you might need the focused attention of breath meditation. Sometimes you might need the gentle acceptance of loving-kindness practice. Sometimes you might need the spacious awareness that recognizes thoughts as clouds in the sky of consciousness. The monk discovered that as his practice matured, he relied less on formal techniques and more on a general quality of mindful presence that could be accessed anywhere, anytime. This is the fruition of practice, not becoming dependent on special conditions or methods, but developing an unshakable capacity for awareness that's always available. But this development happens gradually, organically, through consistent engagement with the practices rather than through forcing or striving. Trust the process. Trust your own capacity for growth and awakening. Trust that every moment you spend developing awareness and compassion is contributing to your own well-being and the well-being of everyone whose life you touch. As we close together, here we are, you and I, at the end of this journey together. But perhaps end isn't quite the right word. What we've shared feels more like a beginning, the opening of a door that can never quite close again. Take a moment to notice where you are right now. Maybe you're in the same place where you started listening hours ago, or maybe you've moved through different spaces as this conversation has unfolded. Either way, something has changed, not just in your understanding, but in the very quality of awareness that's present right now. Do you feel it? That sense of spaciousness that wasn't there before, the way your relationship with your own thoughts has softened, even just a little. That's not something I gave you. That's something you remembered, something that was always there, waiting for you to come home to it. At the very beginning of our time together, I invited you to share where you were listening from. Some of you might have typed a city name or a country into the comments. Others might have just held that sense of connection quietly in your hearts. But now I want to expand that invitation. Right now, as you sit wherever you are, you're part of an invisible circle that spans the entire globe. Someone is listening to these words in a coffee shop in Tokyo, another person in a bedroom in Sao Paulo, someone else walking through a park in Stockholm. Different time zones, different languages, different life circumstances, but all sharing this same moment of turning inward, of choosing presence over distraction, of meeting their own minds with kindness instead of war. This isn't just a poetic image. It's pointing to something real about the nature of consciousness and connection. When you practice presence, when you develop compassion for yourself, when you learn to be the sky instead of the clouds, you're not just healing your own suffering, you're contributing to the healing of the world. The monk understood this deeply after years of practice. Every moment of awareness, every choice to respond rather than react, every instance of meeting pain with compassion instead of resistance, these aren't private events that affect only you. They ripple outward in ways you may never fully know. Think about how different you are when you're centered and peaceful versus when you're stressed and reactive. How you speak to your family, how you drive in traffic, how you interact with strangers, how you make decisions, everything changes. The person who serves you coffee, the colleague you pass in the hallway, the child who sees you walking down the street, they all encounter a different quality of presence. This is what Buddhists call merit, the positive energy that's generated through wholesome actions and intentions. Traditionally, practitioners dedicate the merit of their practice to the benefit of all beings. This isn't just a nice gesture. It's a recognition that nothing we do happens in isolation. So let's do that now. Whatever peace you've touched during our time together, whatever insights have arisen, whatever softening has occurred in your relationship with yourself, let's offer all of that to the circle of healing that connects every person who has ever struggled with their own mind. Place your hand on your heart if that feels comfortable. Take a breath that's a little deeper than usual and silently offer this intention. May whatever peace and understanding I've gained through this practice benefit not only myself, but all beings everywhere who are seeking freedom from suffering. May my journey toward greater self-compassion help create a more compassionate world. This dedication isn't about grand gestures or saving the world through meditation. It's about recognizing that your inner peace is never just about you. When you're less reactive, your children feel safer. When you're more patient, everyone around you can relax a little. When you stop attacking yourself, you naturally stop attacking others. The ripples spread in ways you'll never fully track. The person who feels heard because you were truly present in a conversation might go home and be more patient with their partner. That partner might then have more energy to be kind to a stranger. That stranger might smile at someone who really needed that moment of human warmth. This is how the world heals, not through grand proclamations or perfect people, but through ordinary humans learning to treat themselves and others with a little more kindness, one moment at a time. Now, I want to speak to something you might be feeling as we near the end of our time together. Maybe there's a part of you that's worried about maintaining this sense of peace and clarity as you return to your regular life. Maybe you're concerned that the insights you've gained will fade once you're back in the midst of your usual challenges and responsibilities. That's completely natural. And here's what I want you to know. You don't have to hold on to anything from today. You don't have to maintain any particular state or remember every teaching. What you've awakened to, this capacity for presence, this ability to meet your experience with awareness rather than unconscious reactivity, isn't something you can lose. It might get covered over again by the habitual patterns of busyness and worry. It might seem to disappear under layers of stress and distraction, but it's always there, always available, always just one conscious breath away. You don't have to become a perfect meditator. You don't have to sit for hours each day or attend year-long retreats. You don't have to transform into some enlightened being who never feels stressed or sad or confused. You just have to remember, from time to time, that you have a choice about how you meet whatever is arising in your experience. The path we've explored together isn't about perfection. It's about returning, again and again, to kindness, returning to presence, returning to the awareness that can hold all experiences without being damaged by any of them. Some days you'll remember easily. Other days you'll completely forget and get lost in old patterns of thinking and reacting. Both are part of the journey. Both are opportunities to practice the most radical teaching of all, that you are worthy of love and compassion exactly as you are, not as some improved, future version of yourself. Before we close, I want to share with you one of the Buddha's most beautiful teachings. Near the end of his life, he offered these final words to his disciples: "Work out your salvation with diligence." But the word that gets translated as salvation in English is actually mukti in Sanskrit, which means liberation or freedom. And diligence doesn't mean forcing or striving, but rather patient, gentle persistence. So what he was really saying is this: work out your freedom with patient, gentle persistence. Keep returning to presence. Keep choosing awareness over unconsciousness. Keep meeting your experience with kindness rather than violence. Not because you have to, but because this is how you come home to yourself. Now, let's rest together in a few moments of silence. Let your eyes close gently or soften your gaze downward. There's nothing you need to do except be here, exactly as you are. Feel your breath moving naturally in and out. Notice the space around your body, the air touching your skin. Let yourself settle into this moment with the same tenderness you might show to a beloved friend who's finally found their way home after a long journey. Rest in the awareness that you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your past or your future. You are the conscious presence that witnesses all of these experiences without being limited by any of them. This awareness is your refuge. It's always available, It never judges you. It never abandons you. It's been with you every moment of your life, patiently waiting for you to remember that you are so much more than your stories about yourself. Let yourself rest in this knowing for a moment longer. Take one more conscious breath, feeling the gift of air entering your body, sustaining your life, connecting you to the same atmosphere that surrounds every person on this planet. And when you're ready, gently return your attention to your surroundings, carrying with you whatever peace you've touched, whatever wisdom has awakened, whatever love you've remembered. Know that this conversation doesn't have to end here. These teachings, these practices, this sense of connection to something larger than your personal struggles, it's all available to you anytime you choose to return. Maybe you'll listen to these words again tomorrow, or next week, or whenever you need a reminder of what's possible when you treat your own mind with compassion. Maybe you'll find other teachers, other practices, other ways of cultivating the peace and clarity that are your birthright. Maybe you'll discover that the greatest teacher you'll ever have is your own willingness to meet each moment with open-hearted awareness. However your journey unfolds from here, remember this: you are part of an ancient lineage of beings who have discovered that freedom from suffering is possible. Not through getting everything you want or becoming someone different, but through befriending the consciousness that you already are. The circle of healing continues. Your presence in this moment adds to it. Your kindness strengthens it. Your willingness to return again and again to awareness and compassion helps it grow. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Thank you for your courage in exploring these inner territories. Thank you for your commitment to your own well-being and the well-being of all beings. Until we meet again,